The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly under 3 feet of fresh snow, and Ranger Marcus Cole should have turned back hours ago. But the distress howls echoing through Glacier Ridge weren't coming from any ordinary animals. These were the legendary silverback wolves, a pack thought extinct for decades. When Marcus finally reached them, his heart shattered. 7 magnificent wolves lay dying in a circle, their silver coats stained crimson, victims of illegal poachers who'd left them to suffer. What Marcus didn't know was that he carried the blood of the last wolf speakers, native healers who could bridge the gap between human and wild. As he knelt beside the dying alpha female, something ancient stirred in his veins. The moment he touched her fur, golden light erupted from his hands. The wolf's eyes snapped open, but they weren't just healed, they were changed, and so was he. Now Marcus could hear every creature's thoughts, feel their pain as his own, and command nature itself. But this gift came with a curse that would soon hunt him down. What happens when the government discovers a man who can control the entire animal kingdom? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus stumbled backward, his hands still glowing with residual golden energy. The alpha female rose to her feet with fluid grace, her silver eyes now holding an otherworldly intelligence. Around her, the rest of the pack stirred, their wounds sealed without scars, their breathing strong and steady. "Thank you, Wolf Speaker." The voice resonated in Marcus's mind, clear as spoken words. "We had given up hope that any of your kind remained." Marcus's mouth went dry. He could hear her thoughts. No, not just hear them, but feel the gratitude and ancient wisdom flowing from her mind into his. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a fire hose of pure emotion and memory. "This isn't possible," he whispered. But even as he spoke, he could sense the smaller creatures hidden throughout the forest. A family of rabbits huddled beneath a fallen log 50 yards away. An owl perched silently in a pine tree, its keen eyes watching the miraculous scene below. A hibernating bear shifted restlessly in its den, somehow aware that the natural order had just been fundamentally altered. The alpha wolf padded closer, her massive paws leaving deep impressions in the snow. "Your grandmother's grandmother carried the gift, but it has slept in your bloodline for 4 generations. The violence done to us awakened what was always meant to be." Marcus tried to process her words, but his attention kept fracturing as more animal voices flooded his consciousness. The forest was alive with whispered thoughts and ancient conversations he'd never noticed before. Squirrels chattering about food stores, ravens sharing gossip across miles of territory. Even the trees seemed to pulse with a slow, deep awareness that made his head spin. "Focus on my voice," the alpha advised, her mental tone gentle but firm. "You must learn to control the gift, or it will drive you to madness." Many wolf speakers of old could not bear the weight of so many minds. "What happened to them?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or merely thought the question. "Some retreated to sacred places and lived as hermits. Others lost themselves entirely, becoming more animal than human. A few learned to channel the gift for great healing." Her silver eyes seemed to look straight through him, but all of them eventually faced the same choice you will face. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana wind. "What choice?" Before the alpha could answer, the crack of a breaking branch echoed through the trees. Marcus spun toward the sound, his enhanced senses immediately picking up human thoughts, rough, angry, and getting closer. "The poachers return," the alpha growled, her hackles rising. "They seek to finish what they started." Through the swirling snow, Marcus could see the glow of flashlights bobbing between the trees. 3 men approached, their minds radiating cruel satisfaction and greed. One of them was thinking about the money they'd make selling wolf pelts. Another was annoyed that they'd had to come back to collect the bodies. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to the radio clipped to his belt, but the alpha stepped in front of him. "They cannot be allowed to leave," she said. and suddenly Marcus could feel the thoughts of the entire pack flowing through his consciousness. 7 wolves, now supernaturally enhanced, their bodies thrumming with the same golden energy that had healed them. They will tell others about what they witnessed. Your secret will not remain hidden. I can't just, Marcus began, but the approaching voices cut him off. Blood trail ends right around here, one of the poachers called out. Damn wolves better still be where we left them. The pack began to spread out in a hunting formation, moving with deadly silence through the snow. Marcus could feel their predatory focus, their shared intention. These men had come to claim their prize, but they had no idea they were walking into the territory of something far more dangerous than ordinary wolves. And Marcus realized with growing horror that he wasn't entirely opposed to what was about to happen. The transformation had already begun to change him in ways he didn't yet understand. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Marcus wrapped his hands around the ceramic mug anyway, seeking whatever warmth remained. Outside his cabin, dawn struggled against the dying storm, painting the world in muted greys and whites. He'd been sitting at his kitchen table since 3 in the morning, staring at the radio that had delivered news he couldn't quite process. 3 hikers missing. Last seen heading toward the North Ridge, the same area where he'd found the wolves. Marcus pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to push away the images that had plagued him all night. The Alpha's yellow gaze, the strange electricity that had coursed through his body when their eyes met, the impossible moment when the wolf had seemed to understand him, to communicate without words. Most disturbing of all was what he couldn't remember clearly. The journey back to his truck remained a blur of snow and shadow, fragments of memory that slipped away whenever he tried to focus on them. He remembered carrying the injured pup, but the weight had felt different somehow, lighter than it should have been, yet more significant than anything he'd ever carried before. The radio crackled to life, jolting him from his thoughts. All units, this is base. Search teams Alpha and Bravo report to coordinate 779 for sweep assignment. Weather window is closing fast. We've got maybe 4 hours before the next front moves in. Marcus reached for the handset, then hesitated. His reflection stared back at him from the black window. Same weathered face, same dark hair streaked with premature grey, same green eyes that had seen too much of the wilderness's cruelty. But something felt different. There was an alertness in his posture, a tension in his muscles that hadn't been there yesterday. Base, this is Ranger Cole, he finally responded. I know that terrain better than anyone. I'm heading out. Marcus, you just came in from a 12-hour shift yesterday. Let the search teams handle this one. Those hikers don't have time for protocol debates, Sarah. He was already moving, pulling on his thermal gear with movements that felt strangely fluid, more coordinated than usual. I'll be careful. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood beside his truck at the trailhead, studying tracks in the snow. The hiker's trail was obvious enough. 3 sets of boots heading steadily uphill, their stride pattern suggesting confidence that had likely turned to concern as the weather deteriorated. But other tracks caught his attention. Wolf prints, larger than normal, crisscrossing the human trail with purposeful intent. He shouldered his pack and set off into the forest, following the intertwined paths through stands of snow-heavy pines. The storm had passed, but its aftermath created an alien landscape where familiar landmarks disappeared beneath pristine drifts. Most people would struggle to navigate this transformed terrain, but Marcus found himself moving with surprising certainty, as if some internal compass guided his steps. The sensation grew stronger as he climbed higher. Twice he paused, certain he'd heard voices calling through the trees, only to find nothing but wind and settling snow. Once, he could have sworn something large moved parallel to his path, staying just beyond the edge of vision. When he turned to look directly, he saw only the gentle sway of snow-laden branches. 3 miles in, he found the first sign of trouble. A dropped water bottle, half buried beside a massive pine. The snow around it told a story of hasty movement, of people who had suddenly realized their situation was more serious than they'd anticipated. Marcus knelt beside the bottle, and that's when he noticed his hands. The scratches from yesterday's rescue, Deep gouges where ice and bark had torn his skin were completely healed, not scabbed over or partially mended, but gone entirely, leaving only faint silver lines that looked more like old scars than fresh wounds. He pulled off his gloves, staring at his palms in disbelief. Even more disturbing was how the cold didn't bite at his exposed skin the way it should have. The temperature had to be well below 0, yet he felt only a mild chill, as if his body was generating heat more efficiently than before. A distant howl drifted through the trees, long and mournful, then another from a different direction. Marcus froze, listening intently. He'd heard thousands of wolf calls in his career, but these carried something extra, an urgency that seemed almost like language. Without conscious thought, he found himself understanding their message. Humans, alive, trapped. The knowledge hit him with such certainty that he didn't question its source. Marcus adjusted his pack and began moving faster, his feet finding purchase on the treacherous slope with unnatural sure-footedness. The howls came again, and this time he felt an almost overwhelming urge to answer them. He pressed his lips together, fighting the impulse, but deep in his chest something stirred, a resonance that matched the wild voices calling through the winter forest, drawing him deeper into a mystery that had already begun to change everything he thought he knew about himself. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that sparkled under the emerging sun. Marcus stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching steam rise from his coffee mug into the frigid air. 3 days had elapsed since the night in the forest, yet the memory burned as vivid as fresh flames. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the silver wolf's gaze, ancient, knowing, and somehow grateful. His radio crackled to life. "Marcus, you there?" Sarah's voice cut through the morning silence. "Copy, Sarah. Got a situation developing. Hikers reported unusual animal behavior near Devil's Canyon. Pack of wolves acting aggressive, stalking their campsite. Fish and Wildlife want someone to check it out." Marcus felt something stir deep in his chest, a strange pulling sensation he couldn't identify. "I'll head out within the hour. Be careful out there. Weather Service says another front's moving in tonight." He shouldered his pack, checked his rifle, and set off through the snow-laden forest. The trek to Devil's Canyon normally took 2 hours, but today his pace felt different, stronger. His boots found purchase on ice-slick rocks without conscious thought, and his breathing remained steady despite the altitude and exertion. The first sign of trouble came as howls echoing through the canyon walls. Not the mournful songs he knew, but something harsher, more desperate. As he crested the ridge overlooking the camping area, Marcus spotted the hikers huddled around their fire, their bright orange tent standing out like a beacon against the white landscape. Beyond the campsite, shadows moved between the trees. Wolves, but something was wrong with them. Even from a distance, Marcus could see their erratic movements, the way they paced and circled without the coordinated precision of a healthy pack. He descended carefully, calling out to avoid startling the campers. A middle-aged couple and their teenage son looked up with obvious relief as he approached. "Thank God," the woman said. "They've been out there since dawn, just watching us. We're afraid to leave our campsite." Marcus studied the tree line, counting at least 6 distinct shapes. "Anyone hurt?" "No, but we can't get to our car. Every time we try to pack up, they move closer." The pulling sensation in Marcus's chest intensified, and suddenly he understood. These wolves weren't being aggressive. They were trying to communicate. The realization hit him with startling clarity, as if someone had translated a foreign language he'd been hearing his entire life. "Stay by your fire," he told the family. "I'm going to assess the situation." "Are you crazy?" the father protested. "You can't go out there alone." But Marcus was already walking toward the wolves, his rifle lowered but ready. With each step, the strange sensation grew stronger, like a tuning fork resonating in his bones. The lead wolf, a grizzled male with scars across his muzzle, emerged from the shadows and stood motionless 30 feet away. They regarded each other in silence. Marcus felt his heart beat slow, his breathing deepen, and something impossible happened. Images flashed in his mind, not his own memories, but the wolf's. a younger pack member trapped in a crevice deeper in the canyon, hours of failed attempts to reach her, the desperate decision to seek help from the only other predator in these mountains capable of complex problem-solving. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through him. The scarred wolf whined once, a sound filled with urgency, then turned and trotted toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the canyon. After a few steps, he looked back at Marcus expectantly. "I'll be back," Marcus called to the hikers, who watched in stunned silence as he followed the wolf into the wilderness. The pack led him through terrain that would have been treacherous for most humans, but Marcus found himself moving with newfound confidence. His feet seemed to know where to step, his hands found the right handholds on rocky outcroppings, and his body responded to the environment in ways that defied explanation. They reached the crevice 20 minutes later. A young female wolf lay trapped on a ledge 15 feet down, conscious but unable to climb out on an obviously injured leg. The pack had gathered at the rim, whining and pacing in distress. Marcus assessed the situation. The crevice was too narrow for a standard rescue harness, too deep for the wolves to reach their pack member, and too unstable for an inexperienced climber. But as he knelt at the edge, studying the rock formation, a solution presented itself with startling clarity. He began removing his pack and outer jacket. The scarred wolf approached and sat beside him, no longer showing any signs of aggression or fear. If anything, the animal seemed to radiate a profound trust that Marcus found both humbling and terrifying. Whatever was happening to him, whatever had changed during that night in the blizzard, it was accelerating. The boundary between human intuition and animal instinct was blurring in ways that should have been impossible. As Marcus prepared to descend into the crevice, snow began falling again, and the wind carried something that made his blood run cold, the distant sound of engines approaching through the forest. The transformation hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to the chest 3 days after returning from the mountains. He was sitting at his kitchen table, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and staring at the incident report he'd been trying to complete for hours, when the first wave struck. Fire raced through his veins, starting at his core and radiating outward until every nerve ending screamed. The coffee mug shattered against the floor as his hands convulsed, ceramic shards mixing with the dark liquid. Marcus doubled over, gasping as his bones felt like they were reshaping themselves from the inside out. The wolf's amber eyes flashed in his memory, that moment when their gazes had locked and something indefinable had passed between them. He'd felt it then, a cold certainty settling in his chest, but he'd convinced himself it was just the shock of witnessing such raw death in the wilderness. Now, as his vision blurred and sharpened alternately, he knew better. The pain subsided as suddenly as it had come, leaving him shaking on the linoleum floor. Marcus pushed himself upright, his hands trembling as he reached for his phone. The screen cracked under his grip, impossible, since he'd barely touched it. He stared at the spiderweb of damage, then at his own fingers. They looked normal, but something was wrong. Everything felt too sharp, too intense. The scent hit him next. His neighbor's dog, 3 houses down, had gotten into garbage. He could smell the rotting fish bones from Tuesday's dinner, the sweet decay of apple cores, even the metallic tang of the aluminum cans. The specificity of it made his stomach lurch. No human nose could detect such detail from that distance. Marcus stumbled to the bathroom mirror and examined his reflection. His eyes stared back, darker than usual but unmistakably his own. His skin was pale but not unnaturally so, yet something fundamental had shifted. When he opened his mouth, his canine teeth seemed sharper, more pronounced. He ran his tongue over them tentatively, definitely more pointed than before. The knock at his front door made him jump. Through the walls he could hear Sarah's heartbeat, rapid and worried. The realization that he could distinguish her pulse from the ambient sounds of the neighborhood sent ice through his veins. "Marcus? Your supervisor called me. You missed the morning briefing." He glanced at the wall clock, shocked to see it was past noon. The morning had vanished into a haze of pain and confusion. "I'm fine," he called back, his voice rougher than expected. Just feeling under the weather. You don't sound fine. I'm coming in." Before he could protest, he heard the spare key turning in the lock, the one he'd given her months ago during a moment of optimism about their relationship. Sarah's footsteps crossed the threshold, and suddenly her scent overwhelmed him. Not just her perfume or shampoo, but something deeper, more primitive. He could smell her concern, her affection, even trace amounts of fear. "Jesus, Marcus, what happened in here?" She stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the broken mug and the puddle of coffee he'd forgotten to clean up. "Clumsy morning," he said, emerging from the bathroom while trying to keep his distance. The urge to move closer to her was almost overwhelming, but something warned him it would be a mistake. "I'll clean it up." Sarah studied his face with those perceptive green eyes that had first attracted him. "You look terrible. Have you slept at all since you got back?" Sleep had been impossible. Every night brought dreams of running through snow-covered forests on four legs, of hunting and howling, and the taste of fresh blood. He'd wake with his sheets soaked in sweat and the phantom sensation of fur receding from his skin. "The rescue took more out of me than I thought," he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. She stepped closer, and he caught the acceleration of her pulse. "Marcus, your eyes, what about them? They're reflecting the light, like an animal's." The words hung between them like a blade. Marcus turned away, busying himself with gathering the ceramic shards. Each piece felt fragile as paper in his grip, threatening to crumble to dust. "It's just the angle," he said. "Bad lighting." But Sarah wasn't easily fooled. She'd been a veterinarian for 8 years before switching to wildlife research, and she knew things that others missed. Her silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. "Maybe you should see a doctor," she finally said. "You might have picked up some kind of infection in the mountains. Hypothermia can have lasting effects." Marcus nodded without looking up. "Good idea. I'll make an appointment." They both knew he was lying. They both knew something was happening that couldn't be explained by medicine or logic. As Sarah reluctantly left him alone with promises to check on him later, Marcus stared at his reflection in the broken pieces of ceramic scattered across his floor. In each fragment, amber eyes stared back. The transformation had left Marcus weak, his body still adjusting to changes he couldn't fully comprehend. 3 days had passed since the ritual in the cave, and he'd managed to hike only halfway back to the ranger station. His supplies were running dangerously low, and the supernatural hunger that gnawed at him grew stronger with each passing hour. He'd tried eating his remaining energy bars, but they tasted like cardboard and provided no satisfaction. The wolf within him craved something else entirely, something raw and alive. The thought terrified him almost as much as the ease with which his senses had sharpened beyond human limits. Marcus could hear Sarah's voice on the radio from 2 miles away, calling his designation repeatedly. He'd stopped responding yesterday, afraid of what she might hear in his voice. The static-filled transmissions spoke of search parties being organized, of his supervisor demanding answers about his extended absence from patrol. As evening approached, he made camp in a small clearing beside a frozen stream. The temperature was dropping fast, but the cold barely registered anymore. His skin seemed to regulate heat differently now, as if an internal fire burned beneath the surface. When he'd checked his reflection in the ice that morning, his eyes had appeared more amber than their usual brown, with flecks of gold that seemed to shift in the light. The scent hit him before he saw the deer, a young doe, limping slightly as she picked her way through the snow toward the water. Marcus froze, every muscle in his body coiling with predatory instinct. His mouth watered, and for a terrifying moment he could picture himself bringing the animal down with his bare hands. He forced himself to look away, gripping his knees until his knuckles went white. This wasn't him. This wasn't who he was. But the hunger roared louder, drowning out his rational thoughts with primitive need. When he looked up again, the doe was gone. In her place stood a massive grey wolf, its intelligent yellow eyes fixed on him with unmistakable recognition. Marcus's heart hammered as the wolf approached, showing no fear or aggression, only a strange kind of reverence. "You're not one of them," Marcus whispered, referring to the pack he'd tried to save. "Are you?" The wolf tilted its head, then padded closer until it sat just beyond arm's reach. When it opened its mouth, Marcus nearly fell backward at what emerged. Not a howl or bark, but words spoken in a voice like wind through winter branches. "The old blood awakens," the wolf said, its gaze never wavering. "You carry the burden now, as others have before you." Marcus struggled to form words. "What's happening to me? You chose the path when you gave your essence to save the dying pack. The ancient compact has been renewed, but the price grows heavier with each passing day." The wolf's ears flicked forward. "You feel it, don't you? The hunger that mortal food cannot satisfy?" The admission came out as barely a whisper. "Yes. It will consume you if you fight it. The transformation is not complete. You exist between worlds now, belonging fully to neither." The wolf rose and began pacing in a slow circle around Marcus's position. "There are others like you, scattered across the wilderness, but few survive the transition. What do I have to do? Accept what you've become. Learn to hunt as the wolf hunts, to think as the pack thinks. The man you were still exists within you, but he must share space with something far older." The wolf stopped pacing and fixed him with an intense stare. "Or reject the bond entirely and die as your humanity wars with the spirit you've awakened." Marcus felt the truth of those words resonate in his bones. The constant exhaustion, the way normal food had lost all appeal, the aggressive instincts that surfaced without warning. His body was rejecting his attempts to remain purely human. "If I accept this," he said slowly, "what happens to my life? My job? The people I care about?" The wolf's expression might have been sympathetic. "That depends on how well you learn control. Some of our kind walk among humans for decades without detection. Others—" The wolf's voice trailed off ominously. Before Marcus could ask what happened to the others, the creature began to fade, its solid form becoming translucent against the darkening forest. "Wait!" Marcus called out, scrambling to his feet. "I need to know more. How do I find these others you mentioned?" "When you're ready, they will find you." The wolf's voice was barely audible now, like an echo carried on the wind. "But first, you must feed. The deer waits by the waterfall, a quarter-mile upstream. Take what you need, or lose yourself to madness." The wolf vanished completely, leaving Marcus alone with his hunger and a choice that would define the rest of his existence. The morning light filtered through the cabin windows like a harsh interrogation lamp, revealing the wreckage of Marcus's sleepless night. Empty coffee cups littered the kitchen counter and crumpled papers. His failed attempts to write a resignation letter overflowed from the wastebasket. He'd spent hours staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for visible signs of what he'd become, finding only bloodshot eyes and stubble that seemed to grow faster than it should. The radio crackled to life, Sarah's voice cutting through the silence. "Marcus, you copy? We've got a situation at the Morrison Trail." His hand hesitated over the radio. Every instinct screamed at him to stay hidden, to avoid human contact until he understood what was happening to him. But duty ran deeper than fear, carved into his bones through 15 years of service. "Copy, Sarah. What's the situation?" "3 hikers, overdue since yesterday. Last known position was near Devil's Canyon. Weather's turning again. We need to move fast." Marcus closed his eyes, knowing he had no choice. People's lives hung in the balance, and whatever he was becoming, he was still a ranger first. "I'll take point from the North Ridge. Give me 20 minutes. The drive to the trailhead felt surreal, as if he were watching someone else's hands grip the steering wheel, someone else's foot press the accelerator. The forest pressed in on both sides of the narrow road, and for the first time in his career, Marcus felt like an intruder in this wilderness he'd called home. Sarah and Tom were already gearing up when he arrived, their faces grim with the weight of responsibility that came with every search and rescue operation. Sarah's keen eyes swept over him, and Marcus forced himself to appear normal, checking equipment with practiced efficiency. "You look like hell," she observed, adjusting her pack straps. "Rough night. Let's focus on finding these people." They split up according to protocol, each taking a different approach to the last known position. Marcus headed north, his boots crunching through snow that had fallen overnight. With each step deeper into the forest, something strange began to happen. The overwhelming sensations that had plagued him since the wolf pack incident started to organize themselves into something resembling coherence. The chaos of sense resolved into distinct threads, the metallic tang of fear, hours old but still sharp in the air, human sweat, exhaustion, and something else, blood. Not much, but enough to paint a trail invisible to normal senses. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, realizing what he was experiencing. He was tracking the missing hikers not with his eyes or his training, but with senses that belonged to something else entirely. The part of him that had merged with the dying wolves was taking control, and terrifyingly, it felt natural. Against every rational thought, he surrendered to it. The world exploded into clarity. Every sound became significant. The whisper of wind through pine needles told him about air currents and weather patterns hours in advance. The scent trail blazed like a neon highway through the forest, leading him off the marked path and into terrain that would have taken him hours to search methodically. He moved with fluid grace he'd never possessed before, his body finding purchase on icy rocks and navigating deadfalls with an economy of motion that felt both foreign and completely right. Time seemed to compress as he followed the trail deeper into Devil's Canyon, past the point where any reasonable hiker would have turned back. The scents grew stronger, more immediate. Fresh fear, cold-dampened clothing, and the desperate musk of humans pushed beyond their limits. Marcus crested a small ridge and spotted them. 3 figures huddled in a shallow cave formation, one lying motionless while the other 2 tried to keep him warm. He approached carefully, fighting to suppress the predatory instincts that whispered in the back of his mind. These were people who needed help, not prey to be evaluated for weakness. The mental battle required more effort than the physical journey had. "Forest Service," he called out, his voice carrying further than it should have. "Are you folks all right?" The relief on their faces was palpable. A woman in her 30s scrambled to her feet, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh God, thank you. My husband. He fell. His leg is broken, maybe worse. We've been here all night." Marcus knelt beside the injured man, his enhanced senses immediately cataloguing the extent of the damage. Fractured tibia, mild hypothermia, shock setting in. Without thinking, he began triage with an efficiency that surprised even him, his hands seeming to know exactly what to do. "Radio's not working down here," the woman continued. "The storm knocked out our GPS. We thought—" "You're safe now," Marcus interrupted, keying his radio with coordinates that came to him as naturally as breathing. The numbers were precise to within feet, though he couldn't explain how he knew them. As he worked to stabilize the injured hiker, a cold realization settled over him. Whatever he was becoming wasn't entirely a curse. These people would live because of abilities he couldn't understand or control. But as he caught his reflection in a patch of ice, Marcus saw something looking back that was no longer entirely human. The sheriff's office felt like a cage. Marcus sat rigidly in the uncomfortable plastic chair, every muscle in his body coiled with tension, as Deputy Sarah Chen flipped through her notepad. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their harsh glare making his enhanced vision ache. Everything was too bright, too loud, too overwhelming. "So, let me get this straight," Chen said, not looking up from her notes. "You were caught in the blizzard 3 days ago, found shelter in a cave, and when the storm cleared, you hiked out. That's your story?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The scent of stale coffee and cleaning supplies assaulted his nostrils, but underneath those mundane odors he could smell something else. Fear. Chen's fear. She knew something was off about his account. "Funny thing is, we found wolf tracks all around that cave, big ones. And there were—" She paused, finally meeting his eyes. There were human footprints mixed in with them, barefoot human prints. In the snow, his heart hammered against his ribs. "Wolves follow game trails, so do people sometimes." "Barefoot? In a blizzard?" Chen's eyebrows rose. "Marcus, I've known you for 5 years. You're one of the most straight-shooting guys I know, but something about this whole situation stinks." Before Marcus could respond, the office door burst open. Sheriff Tom Brennan stormed in, his face flushed with anger and something that looked disturbingly like fear. "We've got a problem," Brennan announced, dropping a manila folder on Chen's desk. 3 more campers went missing last night. Same area where Cole here had his little adventure. Marcus felt ice form in his veins. Missing? Their campsite was destroyed, shredded, and there are tracks everywhere, wolf tracks the size of dinner plates. Brennan's eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about unusually large wolves in your sector, would you, Cole?" The room spun slightly. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair, fighting to maintain control as images flashed through his mind, running through the darkness, the taste of snow and pine needles, the exhilarating freedom of the hunt. But those were dreams, weren't they? They had to be dreams. "I haven't seen any wolves," he managed to say. "Not alive ones, anyway." "Not alive?" Chen leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Marcus realized his mistake immediately. He hadn't told them about finding the dead pack. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. "I found some wolf carcasses, old ones, probably been dead for weeks." Brennan and Chen exchanged glances. "You didn't mention dead wolves in your initial statement," Chen said slowly. I forgot. The hypothermia, the stress." "Bullshit." Brennan slammed his hand on the desk, making Marcus flinch. The sound was like a gunshot to his enhanced hearing. 3 people are missing, possibly dead. If there's something you're not telling us..." "There's nothing." The words came out as nearly a growl, and Marcus saw both officers take an involuntary step back. He forced himself to breathe, to calm down. "I'm sorry. I'm still recovering from the exposure. My head isn't completely clear yet." The tension in the room was suffocating. Marcus could hear Chen's elevated heartbeat, could smell the adrenaline coursing through both officers. His own body was responding to their fear and aggression in ways that terrified him. His muscles were tensing, preparing for fight or flight. His vision was sharpening, picking out details he shouldn't be able to see in his peripheral vision. "I think," Chen said carefully, "we should continue this conversation tomorrow, when everyone's had a chance to calm down." Brennan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Marcus's expression made him nod curtly. "Don't leave town, Cole. We're going to want to talk to you again real soon." Marcus stood on unsteady legs. "Of course, whatever you need." He made it to the parking lot before the shaking started. Leaning against his truck, he gulped down lungfuls of cold air, trying to center himself. The scents of the town swirled around him, exhaust fumes, cooking food, dozens of human scents layered and complex. But underneath it all, carried on the wind from the mountains, was something else, the wild. It was calling to him. As he drove home through the gathering dusk, Marcus caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, shadows that seemed to follow his truck. When he stopped at a red light, he could swear he saw yellow eyes watching him from the tree line at the edge of town. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "Haven't heard from you since the storm. Everything okay? Everything okay?" Marcus stared at the message, then at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes looked different, wilder somehow, more alert, predatory. 3 campers were missing. There were giant wolf tracks at their destroyed campsite, and Marcus couldn't remember where he'd been last night. He deleted the text without responding and drove home through the darkness, trying not to think about the hunger growing inside him. The emergency room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Marcus sat hunched in the waiting room chair, his hands trembling despite his best efforts to steady them. The antiseptic smell burned his nostrils, a sharp contrast to the wild sense of pine and snow that had become his new reality. Every few minutes, a nurse would glance his way, probably wondering why he hadn't been seen yet for whatever invisible ailment brought him here. He wasn't here for himself. He was here because Dr. Sarah Chen was working the night shift, and she was the only person he trusted with medical knowledge who might understand what was happening to him without immediately calling for a psychiatric evaluation. The automatic doors whispered open, and Marcus caught a dozen different scents: fear, sickness, cleaning chemicals, and underneath it all, something predatory that made his muscles coil with sudden tension. A man in a dark coat walked past, and Marcus's enhanced senses screamed danger, though he couldn't identify why. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice cut through his paranoia. She stood at the edge of the waiting area, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift, concern etched across her features. "What are you doing here? Are you hurt?" He stood, grateful his legs felt steady. "I need to talk to you. Privately." She studied his face, and he wondered what she saw there. Dark circles under his eyes, probably. The weight loss from barely eating for 3 days, the way he kept glancing toward the exits like a trapped animal. "My break's in 10 minutes, she said finally. "Meet me in the parking lot." The winter air hit him like a physical relief when he stepped outside. His breath formed silver clouds in the cold, but the temperature didn't bite at him the way it should have. Another change. Another sign that he was becoming something other than human. Sarah found him leaning against her car, and she unlocked it without a word. They sat in the dark interior, the engine running for heat, before she turned to face him. "You look terrible," she said with characteristic bluntness. "When's the last time you slept?" Sleep doesn't really work anymore. The admission felt dangerous, but he needed her expertise. "Sarah, I need you to run some tests. Blood work, maybe some scans, but I need you to keep it quiet." Her eyebrows rose. "What kind of tests?" "Marcus, you're scaring me." He closed his eyes, gathering courage. "Something happened to me in the mountains. During that blizzard rescue, I can't explain it properly, but my body is changing. My senses are different, stronger. Sometimes I can hear conversations from half a mile away. I can smell emotions on people. That's impossible." "I know how it sounds." He opened his eyes and met her gaze. "But you've known me for 5 years. Have I ever lied to you? Have I ever shown signs of mental illness?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the dim light from the dashboard. "No," she admitted. "But what you're describing—" "Here." Marcus rolled up his sleeve, revealing his forearm. In the pale light, she could see the marks. Not quite scars, not quite tattoos, silver lines that seemed to pulse with their own faint luminescence, forming patterns that looked almost like— "Are those bite marks?" she whispered. "Something like that." He pulled his sleeve back down. "Sarah, I think something bit me, or bonded with me somehow, and it's changing my DNA." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, that's science fiction." "Is it? You've seen the news reports about the wolf attacks increasing, the strange animal behavior patterns. Rangers are finding evidence of pack activities that don't match any known wolf behavior." He leaned forward. "What if something else is happening? Something the textbooks don't cover?" Sarah was quiet for several heartbeats. When she spoke, her voice was carefully clinical. "If, and I'm saying if, something like this were possible, it would be incredibly dangerous. Genetic alterations on that scale could cause organ failure, neurological damage, cancerous mutations. Or they could cause something else entirely." Marcus felt the familiar itch under his skin, the restless energy that had been building for days. "I need to know what's happening to me. I need to know if I'm dying or if I'm becoming something else." She stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. "I can run some basic blood work, discreetly. But Marcus, if these results show anything seriously abnormal, I'm going to have to recommend you see specialists, people who ask questions." "I understand." But even as he said it, Marcus knew he wouldn't let it come to that. If the tests confirmed his fears, he'd disappear into the mountains before anyone could study him like a lab specimen. As if summoned by his thoughts, a howl echoed across the valley, distant but clear, wild and mournful. Sarah didn't seem to hear it, but Marcus felt the sound resonate in his bones like a calling. Time was running out. The morning sun cast long shadows across the forest floor as Marcus tracked deeper into the wilderness than he'd ever ventured before. 3 days had passed since his confrontation with Elena, and the silence between them had grown unbearable. He needed answers, and something primal within him insisted they lay in the heart of the ancient woods where the pack had first found him. His enhanced senses guided him through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate in his former life. The scent of old magic hung heavy in the air, growing stronger with each mile. Pine needles whispered secrets overhead, while his bare feet found purchase on frost-covered rocks that should have sent him tumbling into the ravine below. The wolf consciousness stirred restlessly in his mind, more agitated than usual. Images flashed unbidden, memories that weren't his own. A great white wolf standing before a circle of stones, human hands painting symbols on cave walls by firelight, the taste of blood and the weight of an oath spoken in a language lost to time. Marcus stumbled, pressing his palm against a massive oak to steady himself. The bark felt warm beneath his touch, almost alive. As his breathing slowed, he noticed the carvings. Spiral patterns wound around the trunk, so weathered they seemed more like natural grooves than deliberate markings. But his transformed sight revealed them clearly, symbols that matched those from the visions. "You're getting close." He spun toward the voice, muscles coiled for action. A woman emerged from behind the tree line, elderly but moving with surprising grace. Her silver hair was braided with feathers and small bones, and her dark eyes held depths that seemed to span centuries. "Who are you?" Marcus kept his distance, every instinct screaming warning. "I am Ayana." She approached without fear, studying him with undisguised fascination. "And you are the first in 3 generations to carry the old blood so completely." I wondered if it would ever manifest again. The old blood? Marcus felt the wolf consciousness pressing against his thoughts, suddenly urgent. "Your great-grandmother knew me, though she chose to forget." Ayana circled him slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. Sarah Cole carried the same gift, but she buried it deep after what happened to her husband. She thought she could protect her bloodline by denying what they were. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My great-grandmother died when I was young, but she was just a forest ranger, like you, like your grandfather, like your father would have been if fear hadn't driven him to the city." Ayana's weathered hand traced the symbols on the oak. "Your family has guarded these woods for over a century, bound by an oath your ancestor made during the great dying of wolves." Marcus's mind reeled as fragments began connecting. His father's inexplicable hatred of the wilderness, the way his grandfather had spoken about the forest as if it were alive, his own overwhelming compulsion to take the ranger job despite better opportunities elsewhere. What oath? The question emerged as barely more than a growl. To become what was needed when the old compact failed. Ayana's eyes gleamed. When men forgot their connection to the wild, when wolves were hunted to near extinction, your bloodline agreed to bridge that gap, to become the guardian that could walk between both worlds. "I didn't agree to anything." Marcus backed away, but the woman followed. "Your choices brought you to that blizzard, to those dying wolves. The bond was always there, waiting. You simply awakened what was already in your blood." She gestured to the carved symbols. "This grove has stood for 1,000 years. Your ancestors came here to renew their vows, to accept the burden and the gift." "Gift?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "I'm losing my humanity piece by piece. My wife can barely look at me without fear. What gift is worth that? The gift of being what the world needs, not what you want to be." Ayana's voice carried iron beneath its gentleness. "The forests are dying, Marcus. Not from disease or fire, but from disconnection. Humans have forgotten they are part of something larger. Without guardians like you, that severance will destroy both species." The wolf consciousness surged forward, and suddenly Marcus could smell it. The wrongness spreading through the forest like infection, streams running bitter with chemicals, animals fleeing territories they'd held for generations, the slow, inexorable death of something vital and irreplaceable. The price will only grow heavier, Ayana continued, but there are ways to bear it, rituals to maintain balance. Your great-grandmother abandoned them, thinking love alone would be enough. You've seen how that ends. Marcus stared at the ancient symbols, feeling their meaning just beyond his grasp. Elena wants me to find a cure. There is no cure because there is no disease, only a choice. Ayana placed her hand over one of the deeper carvings. Embrace what you've become and learn to control it, or fight it until it consumes everything you touch. The forest held its breath around them, waiting for his answer. The helicopter's rotors sliced through the morning air as Marcus pressed his face against the cold window, watching the endless expanse of snow-covered wilderness scroll beneath them. 3 days had passed since the incident at the research station, and the memory of Dr. Chen's terrified face still haunted him. The way she'd backed against the wall when his eyes had shifted, the tremor in her voice when she'd whispered, "Impossible." It all confirmed what he already knew. He was becoming something that shouldn't exist. 15 minutes to base camp. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Marcus nodded, though his attention was elsewhere. Even at this altitude, he could smell the pack. Their scent carried on the wind like a familiar song, calling him home with an intensity that made his chest ache. Sarah sat across from him, her ranger uniform crisp and professional, but Marcus caught the subtle signs of her unease. The way she avoided direct eye contact, how her fingers drummed nervously against her thigh. She'd been different since picking him up from the station, distant, calculating. It was as if she was studying him, waiting for something to happen. "The wolves have been acting strange," she said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "More aggressive than usual. The locals are spooked." Marcus turned from the window. "Strange how?" "They're moving in larger groups, venturing closer to settlements. Yesterday, a pack was spotted just outside Timber Falls. 40 wolves, Marcus. When's the last time you've seen a pack that size?" "Never," he wanted to say, but the word died in his throat, because somehow, impossibly, he could sense them now, not just his original pack, but others, scattered groups throughout the forest, all connected by invisible threads that pulsed with shared purpose. The bond he'd forged with the dying wolves had somehow spread, creating a network that defied everything he knew about wolf behavior. The helicopter began its descent, and Marcus's enhanced hearing picked up sounds that shouldn't have been audible over the rotor noise. Howls, dozens of them, echoing through the valleys below like a wild symphony. His hands clenched involuntarily as something primal stirred in his chest, responding to the call. "You hear that?" Sarah asked, and Marcus realized she was watching him intently. "The howling?" "Yeah, no." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The other sound, that low rumbling. Marcus froze. He hadn't made any sound, had he? But even as the thought crossed his mind, he became aware of a vibration in his throat, a subsonic growl that seemed to emerge without his conscious control. He forced it to stop, but Sarah's expression told him she'd already heard enough. The helicopter touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. As the rotors wound down, Marcus stepped onto the snow-covered ground and immediately felt the forest's presence wash over him like a tide. Every tree, every hidden den, every heartbeat of the creatures that called this place home. He could sense it all with crystal clarity. "Base camp's this way," Sarah said, shouldering her pack. But as they walked through the trees, Marcus noticed she'd positioned herself slightly behind him, her hand resting near the radio clipped to her belt. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't just keeping an eye on him, she was ready to call for backup. They'd gone maybe half a mile when the first wolf appeared, a massive grey male that materialized from behind a cluster of evergreens, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Then another emerged from the left and another from the right. Within minutes, they were surrounded by a circle of wolves, their golden eyes fixed on Marcus with an intelligence that seemed almost human. "Jesus," Sarah breathed, her hand now openly gripping her radio. "Marcus, we need to back away slowly. Don't make any sudden movements." But Marcus felt no fear. Instead, a profound sense of homecoming settled over him as he recognized individual faces in the pack. There was Storm, the alpha female who'd first accepted his presence. Beside her stood Ghost, the pale male whose cubs Marcus had helped deliver last spring. And at the edge of the circle, barely visible among the shadows, were the 3 wolves he'd saved during the blizzard. No longer dying, but transformed into something magnificent and wild. "It's okay," he said softly, taking a step forward. "They won't hurt us." "How can you possibly know that?" Sarah's voice was tight with panic. Marcus turned to look at her, and in that moment he felt the last vestiges of his human facade slip away. His eyes shifted, pupils elongating as his vision sharpened to supernatural clarity. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones that resonated with the howls echoing through the forest. Because they're family. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Sarah's face went pale as understanding dawned, her thumb hovering over the radio's emergency button. Around them, the wolves began to move closer, their circle tightening as if responding to some unspoken command. Marcus knew there would be no going back from this moment. The morning sun cast long shadows through the pines as Marcus made his way back to the ranger station, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wolf within him had grown quieter since the encounter with the military team, but he could feel it stirring restlessly beneath his skin, like a caged animal testing the bars of its prison. Sarah looked up from her desk as he entered, her expression immediately shifting to concern. "You look terrible. When's the last time you slept?" He couldn't tell her that sleep brought nightmares of running through the forest on 4 legs, of tasting blood and feeling the primal satisfaction of the hunt. "I'm fine. Just need some coffee." Marcus. Her voice carried that tone he'd learned to recognize, the one that meant she wouldn't be easily deflected. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about the wolves acting strangely. I did some research." His hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. "What kind of research?" Sarah pulled up several windows on her computer screen. Local folklore, mostly. Stories passed down by the tribal elders about spirit wolves and shapeshifters. "I know it sounds crazy, but—" "Sarah, stop!" The words came out sharper than he intended, and she flinched. He forced his voice to soften. "We're dealing with reality here, not fairy tales." But even as he spoke, he could feel the wolf's interest prickling at the mention of the old stories. Somewhere deep in his transformed consciousness, ancient memories stirred, fragments of a time when the boundary between man and beast was fluid, when the bond was honored rather than feared. "There's something else," Sarah continued, her fingers dancing nervously over the keyboard. "I found reports of similar incidents. Other parks, other rangers, people who disappeared or—" She hesitated, changed. Marcus set down his coffee mug with deliberate care. "What do you mean, changed?" "The reports are vague, but there's a pattern. Rangers who had close encounters with dying wildlife, who tried to help when conventional methods failed. Some vanished entirely, others came back different. Stronger, more attuned to the forest, but also more isolated, more dangerous." The room seemed to grow smaller around him. "You think I'm dangerous?" Sarah's eyes met his, and he saw the conflict there, love warring with growing suspicion. "I think you're in trouble, and I think you're not telling me everything." Before Marcus could respond, his radio crackled to life. "Ranger Cole, this is dispatch. We've got reports of unusual wolf activity near the Thornton Creek Trail. Hikers are reporting an unusually large pack, possibly aggressive behavior." Marcus grabbed the radio. "Copy that. I'll check it out." "I'm coming with you," Sarah said, already reaching for her jacket. "No." The response was immediate and non-negotiable. "I need you to stay here. Marcus, please." He softened the command with a touch of her hand. "Trust me on this." As he drove toward Thornton Creek, Marcus felt the familiar pull in his chest, the wolf calling to its kin. The pack was out there and they were agitated. He could sense their distress even from miles away, a discordant note in the symphony of the forest that only he could hear. He parked at the trailhead and immediately caught the scent. Not just wolves, but humans too. Fear sweat and adrenaline hung thick in the air. Following the trail, he found the hikers huddled near a cluster of boulders, their faces pale with terror. "Thank God you're here," one of them gasped. "They've been circling us for over an hour. We tried to back away slowly like you're supposed to, but they just kept getting closer." Marcus scanned the tree line and found them. 8 wolves, their eyes fixed not on the terrified hikers but on him. The alpha, a massive grey female with silver-tipped fur, stepped forward. In her gaze, he saw recognition and something else, a desperate plea for help. "Stay here," he told the hikers. "Don't move, don't make any noise." He walked toward the pack, feeling the transformation already beginning. His senses sharpened, his muscles tensed with inhuman strength. The alpha wolf approached until they were only feet apart, and Marcus understood with perfect clarity what she was trying to communicate. The pack was dying, not from injury or disease, but from the same ancient curse that had bonded him to their kind. They were caught between worlds, no longer fully wolf, but unable to complete the transformation that had claimed him. They were trapped, suffering, and they had come to him because somehow they knew he was the key to their salvation or their destruction. Marcus felt the weight of their trust, their desperation, and beneath it all, the terrible hunger that grew stronger with each passing day. The wolf within him urged him to embrace his true nature, to lead the pack as he was meant to do. But the man he had been fought against the seductive pull of the wild, knowing that each step down that path took him further from the life he'd known. The choice before him was becoming clearer and more terrifying with each passing moment. The laboratory's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her microscope for the 3rd time, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus sat on the examination table, watching her work with samples of his blood, each vial a different shade of crimson that seemed to shift in the artificial light. "This is impossible," she whispered, stepping back from the equipment. "Your cellular structure. It's rewriting itself in real time. I've never seen anything like it." Marcus felt the familiar itch beneath his skin, the constant awareness of something wild pacing within him. "Tell me something I don't know, Sarah. Tell me how to stop it." Outside the clinic's windows, snow continued to fall in thick curtains. Marcus could smell the storm's approach, could sense the wildlife hunkering down for the worst of it. These heightened senses had become both gift and curse, overwhelming him with information he didn't know how to process. "There's something else," Sarah continued, pulling up a chair. "Your friend Detective Harrison called. There's been another incident." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Where?" "The Morrison Ranch, 20 miles east. 3 more cattle found torn apart, but this time..." She paused, clearly struggling with the words. "This time there were witnesses. A ranch hand saw something attacking the herd. He described it as part man, part wolf, moving like nothing he'd ever seen." The wolf stirred within Marcus, a pleased rumble that made his vision blur momentarily. He gripped the edge of the examination table until his knuckles went white. "It wasn't me. I was at the cabin all last night." "I believe you," Sarah said quickly. "But Marcus, what if you're not the only one? What if whatever happened to you is spreading?" The thought hit him like a physical blow. In his desperate attempt to save the dying pack, had he unleashed something that could multiply the ancient bond he'd felt, the power that had flowed between him and the wolves? Was it still out there, seeking new hosts? A sharp knock on the clinic door made them both jump. Through the frosted glass, Marcus could see Detective Harrison's familiar silhouette, along with 2 other figures he didn't recognize. "Dr. Chen, we need to speak with Mr. Cole immediately." Sarah shot Marcus a warning look before unlocking the door. Harrison stepped inside, followed by a stern-faced woman in a federal agent's coat and a man Marcus recognized as Sheriff Caldwell from the neighboring county. "Agent Morrison, FBI," the woman introduced herself curtly. "Mr. Cole, we need you to come with us for questioning." "On what grounds?" Sarah interjected, moving protectively closer to Marcus. "On the grounds that Mr. Cole was the last known person to be in contact with the wolf pack that started all this," Sheriff Caldwell said. "And on the grounds that we have evidence placing someone matching his description near 3 separate attack sites." Marcus felt the wolf's hackles rise within him, a surge of defensive aggression that made his teeth ache. He forced himself to remain calm, even as his enhanced hearing picked up the rapid heartbeats of everyone in the room, the metallic scent of fear and suspicion. "I've been cooperating fully with Detective Harrison's investigation," Marcus said evenly. "I have nothing to hide." Agent Morrison stepped forward, her eyes cold and calculating. "Then you won't mind submitting to a full examination by our specialists. We have a mobile unit equipped with the latest in genetic analysis technology." "That's not necessary," Sarah protested. "As Mr. Cole's physician, I can provide any medical information you require through proper legal channels." "With respect, Doctor, this situation has moved beyond local jurisdiction. We have reports of similar incidents across 3 states now. Whatever's happening, it's spreading fast." The words hit Marcus like ice water. 3 states. How many others were out there, struggling with the same transformation? How many had lost the battle between man and beast? Harrison caught Marcus's eye, his expression apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Marcus. This is bigger than all of us now. We need answers, and you're the only one who might have them." Outside, the wind howled with increasing fury, and Marcus could hear something else in its voice, a distant howling that made every nerve in his body sing with recognition. The pack was calling, and somewhere deep within him, the wolf was eager to answer. As the federal agents moved to escort him from the clinic, Marcus caught Sarah's hand. "Keep working on those samples," he said quietly. "And Sarah, if things go wrong, stay away from the forest. Whatever's out there, it's hungry." The storm was just beginning, and Marcus had the sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. The ancient wolf's eyes burned like molten gold in the firelight, and Marcus felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. Around the cavern, the pack had grown silent, their forms shifting restlessly in the dancing shadows. Even Elena had stopped her pacing, her own transformed state radiating tension as she watched the elder speak. "The price you pay grows heavier with each passing moon," the Ancient One continued, his voice carrying the wisdom of countless winters. "Already, I can see the change accelerating within you. Your human essence fights a losing battle against the wolf spirit you have awakened." Marcus's hand instinctively went to his chest, where beneath his shirt, coarse hair had begun to sprout in patches. The transformation was no longer limited to moments of high emotion or danger. It was becoming constant, invasive. "How long do I have?" "That depends on choices yet unmade." The elder moved closer, his massive frame dwarfing even Marcus's enhanced form. "There have been others like you, Marcus Cole, humans who formed the sacred bond in moments of desperate need. Most lasted only seasons before the wolf consumed them entirely." Elena stepped forward, her amber eyes flashing. "There has to be another way. The bond saved both Marcus and my pack. Surely there's a path that doesn't end in his destruction." The ancient wolf's attention shifted to her, and Marcus caught something like approval in those golden depths. "The she-wolf speaks with wisdom. There is indeed another path, but it requires a sacrifice that few are willing to make." The cavern fell into complete silence except for the crackling of the fire. Marcus felt his pulse quickening, the wolf nature within him responding to the tension with an urge to pace, to prowl. He forced himself to remain still. "Tell me, the bond between you and the pack can be redistributed." The elder's words came slowly, as if he weighed each one carefully. "Instead of one human carrying the full weight of the ancient pact, it can be shared among many. But this would require other humans to willingly accept a portion of the burden." Marcus's mind immediately went to his fellow rangers, to the friends and colleagues who had already risked so much. The thought of asking them to sacrifice their humanity, even partially, made his stomach clench. What would happen to them? They would retain their human forms, their human minds, but they would carry within them a fragment of the wolf spirit. They would be connected to the pack, able to sense danger, to communicate across vast distances, to tap into abilities beyond normal human limits. They would become guardians. Elena moved to Marcus's side, her presence both comforting and electric. "And Marcus?" He would remain the primary bond-bearer, but the distributed burden would slow his transformation. He might have years instead of months, perhaps even a normal human lifespan, if the sharing proved stable. The possibilities swirled through Marcus's mind like a winter storm. He thought of Sarah Chen, who had already proven her courage in the face of the supernatural. Of Jake Morrison, whose tactical mind and unshakable loyalty made him a natural protector. Of the other Rangers, who had become his extended family over the years. But could he ask such a thing of them? "There's more you're not telling us," Marcus said, reading something in the ancient wolf's expression. "What's the real cost?" A sound that might have been laughter rumbled from the elder's throat. "Perceptive. Yes, there is more. The ritual of redistribution must be performed during the dark moon, when the barriers between worlds grow thin, and it requires the willing participation of not just the humans, but the entire pack. Every wolf must contribute their essence to forge the new bonds." Elena's sharp intake of breath told Marcus he was missing something crucial. "What does that mean for the pack?" "It means we would be bound to these humans for the remainder of our natural lives," Elena said quietly. "Unable to form bonds with other wolves, unable to establish new packs. We would be tied to the human world in ways that go against our deepest nature." The weight of it settled over Marcus like a lead blanket. To save his own humanity, he would need to ask both his human friends and his wolf pack to sacrifice fundamental aspects of their own natures. The pack would lose their wild independence, and his fellow Rangers would lose their purely human existence. "How long do I have to decide?" Marcus asked. "The next dark moon rises in 12 days, the ancient wolf replied. "After that, the opportunity will not come again for a full year. By then—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Marcus understood. By then the transformation would likely be irreversible. The elder began to retreat deeper into the cavern. "Speak with your human allies, speak with your pack. But remember, all bonds require sacrifice, and the strongest bonds demand the greatest sacrifice of all." As the ancient wolf disappeared into the shadows, Marcus felt the full magnitude of the choice before him. 12 days to convince both species to alter their fundamental nature. 12 days to forge a new kind of bond that had never been attempted. 12 days to save everyone he loved, or lose them forever. The military convoy stretched along the mountain road like a metallic serpent, its vehicles churning through the slush left by yesterday's storm. Marcus crouched behind a stand of pine trees, his enhanced hearing picking up radio chatter from the lead Humvee. They were searching for him, and they were getting closer. 3 days had passed since his escape from the facility, and his body was beginning to stabilize. The violent oscillations between human and wolf had settled into something more controlled, though he could feel the beast pacing restlessly beneath his skin. Every scent carried new meaning. Every sound painted vivid pictures in his mind. The world had become a symphony of information that his human consciousness struggled to process. "Alpha." The voice came from behind him, soft and familiar. Marcus turned to find Luna emerging from the underbrush, her silver coat barely visible against the snow-dusted ground. Behind her, 3 other wolves materialized like shadows given form. They had been following him since he'd fled into the wilderness, keeping their distance but never abandoning him entirely. "You shouldn't be here," Marcus whispered, though he knew the futility of his words. The pack bond that had awakened during his transformation created a connection he was only beginning to understand. They were drawn to him as surely as iron to a magnet, and his presence seemed to enhance their own abilities in ways that defied explanation. Luna padded closer, her amber eyes reflecting an intelligence that went beyond mere animal instinct. When she touched her nose to his hand, images flashed through his mind, memories of the pack's former life, their struggles for survival, their acceptance of him as something new and necessary. The telepathic link that Dr. Vasquez had tried so desperately to study was growing stronger. The rumble of engines grew louder, and Marcus felt his muscles tense. His enhanced senses detected at least 20 soldiers armed with tranquilizer weapons and tracking equipment. They had learned from their previous encounters they wouldn't underestimate him again. "We need to move," he told the pack, surprised by how natural it felt to communicate with them through a mixture of words, gestures, and something deeper that bypassed language altogether. The wolves melted back into the forest, moving with supernatural silence. Marcus followed, his hybrid nature allowing him to match their speed while maintaining human reasoning. As they traversed the mountainside, Marcus's thoughts turned to Dr. Sarah Chen. The memory of their last conversation haunted him, her warnings about the government's true intentions, her desperate plea for him to trust her research. She had tried to help him understand what he was becoming, but fear had driven him to flee before she could explain the full scope of the transformation. Now, running through ancient pine forests with a pack that looked to him for leadership, Marcus began to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. This wasn't just about enhanced physical abilities or even the telepathic connection with wolves. He was becoming something that bridged two worlds: human intellect and wolf instinct, civilization and wilderness, individual consciousness and pack mentality. The convoy below had stopped, and Marcus could see soldiers deploying with military precision. They were setting up a perimeter, using thermal imaging to scan the forest. His enhanced vision picked out the heat signatures of their equipment, the red dots of laser sights cutting through the morning mist. A new scent reached his nostrils, one that made his blood run cold. Dr. Richard Hayes was with them, his distinctive cologne mixing with the antiseptic smell that seemed permanently attached to his clothing. The man who had orchestrated his capture, who had turned him into a living experiment, was personally overseeing the hunt. Marcus felt the wolf nature surge within him, demanding action, craving revenge. His muscles began to shift and expand as partial transformation took hold. Claws extended from his fingertips, his senses sharpened to predatory focus, and a low growl built in his throat. Luna's warning bark cut through his rising fury, reminding him that he was no longer just Marcus Cole. He was responsible for the pack now, and they were vulnerable. 3 of the wolves were pregnant, their bodies carrying the next generation. Whatever was happening to them through their connection to him, it was affecting their offspring as well. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about his own transformation anymore. The ancient bond he had awakened was creating something entirely new, a hybrid pack that could bridge the gap between human and animal consciousness. The implications were staggering, and they explained why the military was so desperate to capture him. Marcus forced his body back to human form, though the effort left him trembling. He needed time to think, to understand what Dr. Chen had been trying to tell him. There had to be more to this than random genetic mutation or mystical awakening. The precision of the changes, the way his DNA had integrated wolf characteristics, it suggested purpose, design, perhaps even destiny. The sound of helicopters approached from the north, their rotors beating against the thin mountain air. The net was closing, and Marcus realized that running was no longer an option. If he wanted answers, if he wanted to protect the pack and understand his true purpose, he would have to stop fleeing and start fighting back. The ancient cavern beneath Yellowstone pulsed with otherworldly energy as Marcus descended deeper into the Earth's heart. Bioluminescent fungi cast eerie shadows on the walls, their glow intensifying with each step he took. Behind him, the surviving members of his pack followed in reverent silence. Ashen, Storm, and the 3 youngest wolves who had witnessed their alpha's transformation from man to something far more primal and dangerous. The voice that had called to him grew stronger now, no longer a whisper but a commanding presence that resonated through his very bones. It spoke in a language older than words, older than civilization itself. The bond that connected him to the wolves had become a conduit for something vast and terrible, something that had slumbered beneath the earth for millennia. "You feel it now, don't you?" The voice materialized as a figure emerged from the shadows ahead, an elderly Native American woman whose eyes held the depth of centuries. "The weight of what you've awakened." Marcus's transformation rippled beneath his skin, muscles shifting between human and lupine with each labored breath. The price of his power had been growing heavier with each passing day. Where once the change had been voluntary, now it threatened to consume him entirely. "Who are you?" he managed, his voice a guttural growl that echoed off the cavern walls. "I am what remains of those who came before," she replied, stepping closer. The wolves behind Marcus whined softly, sensing the ancient power that radiated from her diminutive form. "I am the last keeper of the old ways, the final guardian of a bond that should have remained buried." She gestured toward the deeper passages, where a faint red glow pulsed like a heartbeat. "When you chose to save that dying pack, when you opened yourself to the wolf spirit, you didn't just gain their abilities, you became a conduit for something far older, the primal force that once connected all living things before mankind forgot its place in the natural order." Marcus felt the truth of her words in every fiber of his being. The episodes were becoming more frequent now, moments where he lost himself completely to the wolf consciousness. Sarah had tried to hide her fear, but he'd seen it in her eyes during their last conversation. The research station's cameras had captured footage of his latest transformation, a creature that was neither fully man nor wolf, but something that defied all natural law. "There's a way to stop this," the woman continued, her weathered hand pointing toward a narrow passage carved with symbols that seemed to move in the flickering light. "But the choice you face now makes your first decision seem simple." They walked deeper, the air growing thick with an energy that made Marcus's teeth ache. The passage opened into a vast chamber where the red glow emanated from veins of some unknown mineral threaded through the rock. At the chamber's center stood a circular stone platform covered in intricate carvings. "This is the heart of the bond," the keeper explained, "the source from which all connection between human and animal consciousness flows. It has been feeding on your transformation, growing stronger with each change you undergo. Soon, it will have enough power to extend its influence beyond you, beyond your pack." Marcus understood with dawning horror. "It's using me as an anchor to break free into the modern world." Yes, imagine every person on Earth suddenly connected to the primal consciousness of their nearest animal. The chaos would be absolute. Civilization would crumble in days. The platform began to glow brighter as Marcus approached, responding to his presence. The wolves behind him started to howl, a mournful sound that spoke of endings and sacrifice. "You have two choices," the keeper said solemnly. "Embrace the transformation completely, become the vessel it needs, and watch the world burn as the barriers between human and animal consciousness collapse forever. Or sever the bond entirely. Cut yourself off from the wolf spirit that saved you. Return to being fully human, but lose the pack that has become your family. They will die, Marcus. Without the connection that sustains them, without you, they cannot survive." Marcus looked back at Ashen, at Storm, at the young wolves who trusted him completely. They had already lost so much. The pack that had been dying in the blizzard when he first found them had dwindled to these precious few. How could he choose between saving them and saving humanity? The red veins in the chamber walls pulsed faster now, responding to his emotional turmoil. The ancient force sensed his approaching decision and pressed against his consciousness like a living thing, showing him visions of a world where the barriers between species meant nothing, where raw instinct ruled over reason. Sarah's face flashed through his mind, her brilliant smile, her unwavering faith in him, even as he became something monstrous. The research they had planned together, the future they might have shared if he had remained human. The keeper waited silently as Marcus stepped onto the platform, his hand moving toward the central carving that would seal his fate forever. The silver light of dawn filtered through the laboratory's reinforced windows, as Marcus felt the final threads of the ancient bond unraveling within him. Each breath came easier now, his heartbeat settling into a purely human rhythm, but with that relief came an overwhelming emptiness, like losing a limb he'd never known he possessed. Dr. Sarah Chen monitored the readings on her tablet, her expression grave. The cellular restructuring is accelerating. Whatever connection you had to the wolves, it's severing completely. She looked up at him, concern etched in her features. How do you feel? Hollow. Marcus flexed his fingers, watching them with detached fascination. They looked the same, but he could no longer sense the pack's presence thrumming beneath his skin. They're out there somewhere, and I can't feel them anymore. Through the laboratory's communication system, Agent Rivera's voice crackled to life. Marcus, we've got a situation. The remaining infected wolves have converged on Millbrook's eastern perimeter. They're not attacking yet, but a pause filled with static. They appear to be waiting for something. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. They're waiting for me. Even without the bond, he understood their behavior. The pack's alpha instincts remained, seeking their transformed leader even as the corruption consumed them. You can't go out there, Sarah said firmly. Not in your condition. The transformation reversal has left your immune system compromised. If you're exposed to whatever's driving their aggression, then I'll die as a human instead of a monster. Marcus moved toward the door, but Sarah stepped into his path. That's not heroic. It's suicide. We need another solution. The laboratory's main doors hissed open as Dr. Elizabeth Thorne entered, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled from hours of frantic research. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but they burned with desperate intensity. I found something, she announced, clutching a leather-bound journal. In my grandfather's notes about the original experiments. The corruption that's affecting the wolves, it's not natural. It's a fail-safe mechanism built into the ancient bond itself. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What kind of fail-safe? Thorne opened the journal, revealing pages covered in archaic symbols and detailed anatomical drawings. When the bond between human and wolf becomes too unstable, the magic turns destructive. It's designed to eliminate both sides rather than allow the power to spread uncontrollably. So the wolves are dying because I lost control of the transformation. The weight of guilt settled on Marcus's shoulders like a physical burden. Not just dying, Thorne corrected grimly. They're becoming vessels for concentrated magical energy with nowhere to go. If that energy reaches critical mass... She traced a diagram showing expanding circles of devastation. The resulting explosion could level half the mountain. Sarah's tablet chimed with an urgent alert. Energy readings from the eastern perimeter just spiked 20%. Whatever's happening to those wolves, it's accelerating. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling utterly powerless for the first time since the transformation began. Without the bond, he was just a man, incapable of communicating with the pack, unable to guide them or ease their suffering. The very humanity he'd fought to preserve now felt like a cage. There has to be something we can do, he said. Thorne's expression grew thoughtful as she studied her grandfather's notes. There might be, but it would require someone willing to temporarily re-establish the bond, not to control the wolves, but to serve as a conduit for the excess energy, to absorb it and channel it safely away from populated areas. That sounds like a death sentence with extra steps, Rivera's voice cut through the intercom. It is, Thorne admitted. The human nervous system isn't designed to handle that much raw magical energy. Whoever attempts it would be completely consumed. Marcus met her gaze steadily. I'll do it. Marcus. No. Sarah grabbed his arm. We'll find another way. We have to. The readings show we have maybe 2 hours before the wolves reach critical mass, Thorne said quietly. There isn't time for another way. Through the window, Marcus could see smoke rising from the forest where his former pack, waited in their agonizing limbo. He thought of Luna, the silver-furred alpha female who had first accepted him. Of Ghost, the scarred veteran who had taught him to hunt. Of all the wolves who had welcomed a lost human into their family, only to suffer because of his inability to master the gift he'd been given. Prepare whatever ritual or procedure is necessary, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. If I created this problem, then I'll solve it, even if it kills me. Sarah's grip on his arm tightened. There has to be another way. Please, just give us more time to... An explosion echoed across the valley, followed by an inhuman howl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the laboratory. Through the windows they watched as a pillar of silver fire erupted from the eastern forest, reaching toward the clouded sky like a beacon of impending doom. "Time's up," Marcus whispered. The ancient oak stood like a sentinel against the storm-darkened sky, its massive trunk scarred by centuries of lightning strikes and seasons of growth. Marcus pressed his palm against the rough bark, feeling the pulse of something far older than memory itself. The wolf essence within him stirred, recognizing this place as sacred ground. "This is where it began," he whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, "where the first bond was forged." Elena stepped beside him, her rifle lowered but ready. The past weeks had changed her too. The rigid lines of skepticism had softened into something approaching understanding. "The tree the elders spoke of?" Marcus nodded, closing his eyes as visions flooded his mind. He could see them now, the ancient ones, both human and wolf, gathered beneath these same branches millennia ago. Their voices echoed across time, speaking of sacrifice, of balance, of the terrible price that must be paid to maintain the bridge between worlds. Behind them, the remaining members of his pack emerged from the tree line. Only 7 wolves remained from the dozens that had once followed him. Their golden eyes held the same weary resignation that Marcus felt in his bones. They understood, as he did, that this journey was nearing its end. "The corruption is spreading faster," Dr. Sarah Chen's voice crackled through Elena's radio. "Satellite imagery shows the dead zones expanding exponentially. Whatever you're going to do, it needs to happen now." Marcus felt the truth of those words in every cell of his body. The bond that had saved him was now destroying everything it touched. Each day he remained connected to the wolf essence. The natural world around him withered a little more. Trees died without reason, streams ran black with poison, and the very air itself seemed to recoil from his presence. He had become an abomination. "There's another way," Elena said suddenly, her voice tight with desperation. "There has to be. We can find a method to sever the bond without my death?" Marcus turned to face her, seeing his own pain reflected in her eyes. "We've been through this. The bond can only be broken by the one who forged it, and the price is always the same." The alpha wolf, the first one he had saved in that blizzard so many months ago, padded forward. Her coat was streaked with premature grey, another sign of the corruption spreading through their shared essence. She pressed her massive head against his leg, a gesture of both comfort and farewell. Marcus knelt beside her, running his fingers through her fur as he had that first night when she lay dying in the snow. "I know, old friend. It's time." The ritual was simpler than he had expected. No complex ceremonies or arcane words were needed, only truth and the willingness to pay the ultimate price. Marcus placed both hands on the ancient tree and felt the full weight of the bond settle onto his shoulders like a lead blanket. The forest around him came alive with presence. Every wolf that had ever shared the ancient connection was there in spirit, their voices joining in a chorus that transcended death itself. They spoke of gratitude and sorrow, of the beauty and burden of the bridge between worlds. "Tell me something," Elena said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "In all of this, do you regret it? The choice you made that first night?" Marcus considered the question as power began to build within the oak's trunk, ancient energies responding to his touch. He thought of the wolves he had saved, the balance he had temporarily restored, the wonder of experiencing the world through senses beyond human comprehension. "No," he said finally. "I regret that it has to end this way, but I don't regret the choice. Some things are worth dying for." The corruption that had been eating away at his soul began to writhe and twist, fighting against the ritual's pull. It had grown strong during their bond, feeding on the very life force that connected him to the wolves. Now it sensed its approaching destruction and raged against the inevitable. Pain lanced through Marcus's body as the dark essence fought to maintain its hold. His vision blurred, showing him flashes of what would happen if he failed. Entire continents reduced to lifeless wasteland, the corruption spreading until nothing green remained on Earth. I won't let that happen, he growled, his voice carrying harmonics that were purely wolf. Elena raised her rifle, not at Marcus, but at something moving in the shadows beyond the clearing. We're not alone. Dark shapes emerged from between the trees, wolves, but wrong somehow, their eyes reflecting an unnatural red light. The corruption had found them, manifesting its own pack to prevent the ritual's completion. Marcus felt his strength wavering as the tainted wolves circled closer. The ancient tree's power pulsed against his palms, ready to complete the bond's destruction, but he needed more time. Just a few more moments to ensure the ritual would hold. Elena, he said quietly, never taking his eyes off the approaching threat. Whatever happens next, don't try to stop me. The ancient oak's roots pulsed beneath Marcus's feet as dawn broke over the forest, painting the snow-covered clearing in shades of gold and crimson. The dying wolf pack lay scattered around him, their breathing shallow, their eyes reflecting the same desperate hope he'd carried for 17 chapters of this impossible journey. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, her own transformation incomplete, caught between human and wolf. The curse that had bound them, that had made him something the world had never seen, writhed like a living thing in the air between them. Marcus could feel it testing him, probing for weakness, for any crack in his resolve that would allow it to consume what remained of his humanity. The choice has to be yours, Lyra whispered, her voice carrying on the morning wind. I can't make it for you. Marcus knelt beside Luna, the pack's alpha female, her silver coat matted with frost and blood. Her golden eyes met his, and in them he saw not just the intelligence of a wild creature, but something deeper, an understanding that transcended species. She had been the first to accept him when his transformation began, the first to recognize that he might be their salvation rather than their destroyer. The power coursed through him now, stronger than ever before. He could feel every heartbeat in the clearing, every flutter of breath from the dying wolves, every tremor of life force ebbing away. The ancient bond that connected him to them sang in his veins like electricity, offering him the ability to heal them, to save them, to preserve this sacred pack that had become his family. But the price whispered its demands in his ear. To save them completely, to break the curse that threatened to consume them all, he would have to surrender the very thing that made him who he was. Not his humanity, he'd already sacrificed much of that, but his connection to both worlds. He would become fully wolf, losing forever the ability to walk among humans, to protect the wilderness he'd sworn to guard as a ranger, to be the bridge between two worlds that had been at war for centuries. Marcus pressed his palm against Luna's chest, feeling her heart flutter like a trapped bird. Around him, the other wolves, Fenris, Shadow, the young pups who'd never known a world without fear, waited with the patience of creatures who understood that life and death were part of the same endless cycle. But he'd learned something else in these months, since the blizzard that changed everything. Sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in fighting the inevitable, but in choosing which parts of yourself to sacrifice and which to preserve. He thought of the villages at the forest's edge, the hikers and tourists who would continue to venture into these woods. Without someone to stand between the human and natural worlds, the cycle of fear and misunderstanding would continue. The wolves would remain hunted, misunderstood, driven to extinction not by nature but by ignorance. "There's another way," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. Marcus stood and walked to the center of the clearing, where the oak's roots formed a natural circle. The curse swirled around him, sensing his decision, eager to claim its due. But instead of surrendering to its demands, he began to change the terms. He thought of every moment that had led him here, the dying wolves in the blizzard, the first transformation that had terrified and amazed him, the gradual understanding that his curse might actually be a gift. The power that flowed through him wasn't just ancient magic, it was the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who had tried to build bridges between worlds. "I won't choose between them," Marcus declared to the morning sky. "I won't abandon either world." The curse lashed out, trying to force his decision, but Marcus held firm. Instead of feeding it his surrender, he fed it something else, his fear, his doubt, his need to be purely one thing or another. He let those limitations burn away, accepting instead the harder path of being both and neither. The transformation that took him then was unlike any he'd experienced. The wolf remained, but so did the man. The forest ranger who could speak for the wilderness, but also the alpha who could lead a pack. The bridge between worlds that the curse had tried to destroy. Light exploded from the oak's roots, washing over the clearing. The dying wolves gasped as life flowed back into them, their wounds healing, their strength returning. But more than that, the ancient fear that had driven the conflict between human and wolf began to dissolve, replaced by the possibility of understanding. Luna rose to her feet, her eyes bright with renewed vitality. She padded over to Marcus and pressed her forehead against his chest, not in submission, but in recognition of an equal. As the sun climbed higher, Marcus Cole walked toward the edge of the clearing, where both a ranger's cabin and a wolf pack's territory waited. Behind him, the ancient oak stood sentinel over a new beginning, its roots carrying the promise of balance into the earth itself. The world had never seen anything like him before. Now it would learn to understand.